We get sold the story of explorers and warriors, the longships cutting through the mist, the discovery of new lands, the hoard of silver glinting in a Viking hall, but almost nobody talks about the machinery that powered that world, the human machinery. The part of the story that doesn't get carved on runestones. We don't talk about the slave markets in Dublin and Hedeby that were as vital as any shipyard. We don't talk about the word for a female slave, ambat, and what that status really meant. We're told about victory feasts, the drinking horns and the boasts of warriors. But what happened after the fires burned low? What happened to the women taken in the raids, the women who served the mead? What did the Vikings do to them when the celebration was over? The answer isn't in a glorious saga. It's written in law codes that value a woman's body as property. It's in the DNA of entire nations. And it's in the eyewitness account of one man who watched a victory feast turn into a ritual of death, a depravity more calculated and cold than you can imagine. If you value documented history that pulls no punches, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Tell us in the comments what city you're listening from. This story is built from hard evidence. We're drawing from the old Icelandic law code, the Gragas, which details the rights, or lack thereof, of the enslaved. We are also using the direct 10th century eyewitness report of the Arab diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan, whose detailed account of a Viking funeral on the Volga River was preserved for 1,000 years in manuscripts like the Mashhad Shrine Library manuscript, rediscovered in 1923. Now, back to the story. It starts with the sound of a splintering door. Before she is a slave, she is a daughter, a wife, a sister in a coastal village in Ireland, Northumbria, or Francia. The year could be 800, it could be 950. The season is summer, the raiding season. The alarm comes too late. Longships on the horizon, dragon heads carving through the waves, are a death sentence. To the raiders, this isn't a town, it's a resource. A treasure chest where some of the treasure breathes. The fighting is fast and brutal. Men of fighting age are cut down. The old, the infirm, the very young, they are liabilities. They are killed where they stand. But the young, the healthy, the strong, they are the prize. They are the walking silver. You're rounded up on the beach. Your hands are bound with rope, maybe with iron shackles they brought for this exact purpose. You watch your home burn. This is the first filter. The weak or the defiant might be killed right here. A lesson for the others. You are herded onto the longship, packed in with the livestock they also stole, crammed between chests of looted church silver and barrels of provisions. The journey is the second circle of hell, weeks at sea. Exposed to the elements, given just enough food and water to keep you alive, to keep the product from spoiling. Disease spreads quickly in the packed, filthy conditions. Dysentery, scurvy. Many captives don't even survive the trip. For a woman, the terror is constant. You are property from the moment your hands are bound. The men who killed your family are now your absolute masters. The sagas, for all their heroism, are chillingly casual about this. In the Laxdæla saga, the Icelandic chieftain Hoskuld Hoskuldsson buys a woman named Melkorka in Norway. He is told she is deaf and mute. It is only years later, after she has borne him a son, that he discovers she is an Irish princess who was captured and pretended to be mute to hide her high birth. Her trauma is a footnote to his story. If you survive the journey, you end up in a place like Dyflin, the Viking settlement that would become Dublin, or Hedeby in modern Germany, or Birka in Sweden. These aren't just towns, they are international trade hubs, and the primary commodity is human beings. Archaeological digs in the Temple Bar area of Dublin have uncovered the 9th and 10th century Viking settlement. They found the outlines of their houses, their workshops, and the goods they traded: amber from the Baltic, silks from Byzantium, silver from the Abbasid Caliphate. And among these finds are the tools of the slave trade: iron collars and shackles. You are brought to the market, the Thrella marketer. You are paraded, inspected like an animal. Your teeth are checked. Your limbs are felt for strength. Your price is haggled over. A healthy young woman could fetch a high price, perhaps 12 to 20 ounces of silver, the equivalent of a small farmstead. You might be bought by a local chieftain to work in his household, or you might be bought by a merchant heading east. The journey east is even longer. Down the rivers of what is now Russia and Ukraine, the Dnieper, the Volga. These river highways were the arteries of a vast slave trading network run by the Rus, Vikings who settled in the east. They traded furs, honey, wax, and people. They traded with the Khazar Khaganate. And they traded with the great empires of the south, Byzantium and the Caliphate. In Constantinople, the Vikings were known as the Varangian Guard, elite mercenaries for the emperor, but the city's markets also knew them as slavers. In Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, the demand for European slaves, Amintur, the Sakaliba, was enormous, especially for women. They were prized in the harems of the caliphs and emirs. The silver dirhams minted in Baghdad and Samarkand flowed north in their thousands. Hordes of these coins are found all over Scandinavia, from Gotland to Norway. This is the physical proof. This is the blood money. Each coin is the ghost of a person, a life stolen and sold. A Swedish runestone, the Karlovy runestone on the island of Öland from the late 10th century, commemorates a chieftain who died on his travels. It speaks of his power and wealth. That wealth was built on this trade. He was a master of men, but also a seller of them. Once you are bought, your life is not your own. You are an ambat. You live in your master's longhouse, but you're not family. You sleep on the floor, or in a small outbuilding. You do the hardest work, grinding grain for hours on a heavy cornstone, tending the fire, mucking out the animal stalls, weaving cloth, serving the family at meals. Your food is the leftovers. Your clothes are the coarsest wool, and you have no legal standing. The law codes make this brutally clear. The Icelandic Gragas is one of the most complete records of Viking Age law. It is a world of grim precision. If a free man kills another free man, it's a crime punished by outlawry or a massive fine paid to the family, the Wergild. But if a free man kills his own thrall, he has committed no crime. He has simply damaged his own property. If another man kills your thrall, he pays you the thrall's market price. The life itself has no value, only the owner's investment. The law is even more explicit about sexual violence. The rape of a free woman was a serious offense, a crime against her and her family, leading to outlawry. But the rape of an enslaved woman was not a crime against her because she had no legal personhood. It was a property crime against her owner. A man who raped an ambat had to pay a small fine to her master for trespassing on his property. That was all. The master himself had unlimited sexual access. It was an accepted right of ownership. Any child you bore belonged to your master. The child was born a slave, just like you. There was a path to freedom, called leisingi, where a slave could be freed by their owner, but it was rare. For most, slavery was a life sentence, and a hereditary one. This reality is reflected in the sagas. In the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, 2 of his father's thralls help him hide a treasure of silver. Once the job is done, Egil murders them both to keep the secret. Their deaths are a practical matter, not a moral one. This was the world of the ambat, a world without rights, without protection, without hope. You were a tool, a vessel, a piece of property, and at no time was this made clearer than after a victory. A victory feast in a Viking hall was a loud, drunken, violent affair. The warriors have returned from a successful raid. The long tables are piled with roasted meat and bread. The air is thick with smoke from the central fire pit and the smell of spilled ale and mead. They drink from horns. They boast of the men they killed, the silver they stole, the towns they burned. And they are surrounded by the living trophies of their victory, the enslaved women who serve them. You are the one pouring the mead. You are the one bringing more food. You have to endure their boasts about the raid that destroyed your world. You have to serve the men who killed your father, your brothers. And the threat of violence is constant. A spilled drink, a moment of hesitation, could earn you a beating, or worse. As the night wears on and the men get drunker, the atmosphere darkens. The law says you are your master's property. His guests are in his house. In the Viking code of hospitality, a host was expected to be generous. This generosity could extend to offering his servants to his guests. There was no law against it. There was no one to stop it. This was not a secret shame. It was a public display of power and ownership. The feast was a celebration of dominance, and the sexual subjugation of captured women was the final, most intimate act of that domination. It was a way of saying, we conquered your people, we took your wealth, and now we take your bodies. Everything you were belongs to us. This was the reality of the victory feast. It was not just a party. It was the ritualized assertion of the victor's spoils, and the enslaved women were the primary prize. If you value the unvarnished truth of history, hit that subscribe button to support our research. We want to know where this story is reaching, so drop your city in the comments. Our understanding of this dark reality is pieced together from grimly practical law codes, the casual cruelty of the sagas, and the cold, hard data of modern science. Groundbreaking genetic studies, like the 2017 paper by Ashot Margarian and others in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B, have analyzed ancient DNA from Viking burial sites across Europe. Their findings confirm on a genetic level what the history suggests, a massive one-way flow of women into Scandinavia from the British Isles and Eastern Europe. Now, back to the ultimate expression of this ownership. For some enslaved women, their servitude did not end with their master's death, it led to their own. The most chilling, detailed and undisputed account of what could happen comes from Ahmad ibn Fadlan. He was an emissary of the Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtadir, sent from Baghdad in the year 921 on a diplomatic mission to the king of the Volga Bulgars. Along the Volga River, in the summer of 922, he encountered a group of Rus, Swedish Vikings who dominated the river trade routes. While he was there, one of their chieftains died. What he witnessed next, he recorded in his official report, his Risala. It is the only surviving eyewitness account of a Viking ship funeral. First, they placed the dead chieftain in a temporary grave for 10 days while they prepared. They gathered his wealth and divided it into 3 parts. 1 part for his family, 1 part for the funeral garments and provisions, and 1 part for the massive quantities of mead, a strong alcoholic brew, that would be consumed during the ceremony. Then, they asked his household of enslaved people, "Who among you will die with him?" A young woman, an Ambati, volunteered. From that moment, she was treated with a strange, grim reverence. 2 other enslaved girls were assigned to her. They watched her every move, accompanying her everywhere. The Rus warriors, the dead chief's companions, began to feast and drink, a celebration that would last for days. Ibn Fadlan reports that during this time, the girl who had volunteered went from tent to tent, and the owner of each tent would have sexual intercourse with her. As he did so, he would say, "Tell your master I did this only for love of him." This was not an orgy of passion. It was a cold, ritualized act. A message being sent to the world of the dead through the body of a woman who was about to be dispatched there. On the day of the funeral, they dragged the chieftain's ship ashore. They built a platform on it, a deathbed of silk and cushions from Byzantium. An old woman, whom they called the Angel of Death, was in charge of the ritual. She was the one who would kill the girl. They brought the chieftain out of his grave and dressed him in his finest clothes, trousers, boots, a tunic of silk, and a fur-lined coat. They propped him up on the cushions, surrounded by his weapons, food, drink, and the bodies of a sacrificed dog, 2 horses, 2 oxen, a rooster, and a hen. Meanwhile, the volunteer girl was taken to a wooden doorframe, a symbolic gateway to the other world. They lifted her over it 3 times. The first time, she said, "Oh, behold, I see my father and my mother." The second time, "Behold, I see all my dead kindred sitting." The third time, she said, "Behold, I see my master, seated in paradise. And paradise is so green and beautiful. With him are his men and his young warriors. He calls to me, so let me go to him." After this, they gave her a final, strong drink of nabidh. The interpreters told Ibn Fadlan this was to make her confused and unaware of what was about to happen. She tried to sing, but she was faltering. The Angel of Death led her onto the ship and into the death tent. The chieftain's men followed, and Ibn Fadlan confirms again that they all had intercourse with her one last time inside the tent where her dead master lay. Then they laid her down beside him. 2 men took her legs. 2 took her arms. The Angel of Death placed a cord of twisted rope around her neck and gave the ends to 2 other men to pull. As they strangled her, the old woman advanced with a large, broad-bladed dagger. She plunged it between the girl's ribs, again and again, while the men pulled the rope. The girl was simultaneously stabbed and strangled. It was a brutal, terrifying death. Then, the relatives of the dead chief set the ship on fire. The wooden vessel, the tent, the chieftain, the girl, and all the sacrificed animals were consumed in a massive pyre. One of the Rus men standing next to Ibn Fadlan remarked, "You Arabs are fools. You take the people you love most, and you put them in the ground, to be eaten by the earth and by worms. We burn him in an instant. So he goes to paradise at once." Ibn Fadlan could only write down what he saw, a ritual of such calculated cruelty it defied his understanding. For a long time, some historians wondered if Ibn Fadlan's account was exaggerated, the sensational report of an outsider horrified by pagan customs. But archaeology tells us he was telling the truth. Across the Viking world, we find burials that echo his description. In Flakstad, Norway, a 10th century grave held the bodies of a high-status woman buried with a decapitated man, likely a slave, sacrificed to accompany her. At the great trading center of Birka in Sweden, numerous chamber graves from the 10th century show evidence of human sacrifice. In one grave, a warrior was buried with his weapons, his horses, and a woman laid at his feet. In another, a woman was buried on top of a man's coffin, her neck broken. The most famous Viking burial of all, the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, dated to around 834 Spur, contained the skeletons of 2 women. One was an elderly, high-status woman, likely a queen or a priestess. The other was a younger woman. For years, It was assumed she was a servant who willingly followed her mistress into death. But modern analysis of the skeletons, detailed in studies by scholars like Neil Price, suggests a more complex story. The younger woman's DNA shows she had a less privileged diet. Her collarbone was broken shortly before her death, a wound that may have been part of a ritual killing. She wasn't just a companion, she was a sacrifice. The evidence is not just in graves, it's in our own genes. The founding of Iceland in the late 9th century is a perfect case study. The Landnámabók, the Icelandic Book of Settlements, lists the names of the original Norse settlers. It's a story of male chieftains. But modern genetics tells the other side of the story. Studies of the modern Icelandic population, pioneered by scientists like Agnar Helgason in the early 2000s and refined ever since, show a striking pattern. The Y chromosome DNA, which is passed down from father to son, is overwhelmingly Scandinavian. But the mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mother to child, shows a huge proportion of ancestry from the British Isles, specifically Ireland and Scotland. One study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2001 found that over 60% of the maternal lineages in Iceland were of Gaelic origin. The conclusion is inescapable. The founding fathers of Iceland were largely Viking men, and the founding mothers were largely enslaved Gaelic women taken in raids and brought to this new land to serve, labor, and bear children who would be born free. An entire nation was built on the foundation of a massive, gender-biased slave trade. The legacy of the Ambat is not just in the ground, it is walking around today in the people of Iceland. We've seen the raid, the market, the life of servitude, the horror of the feast, and the ultimate sacrifice at the funeral pyre. It's a story of systematic dehumanization, codified in law and sanctified by ritual. But there is one last piece of evidence to consider, a discovery that reframes the entire narrative not with an excuse, but with a cold, hard dose of context for a brutal age. In June of 2009, archaeologists working on a new road in Dorset, on the southern coast of England, uncovered a mass grave. It was a pit, filled with the bodies of 54 young men. All of them had been decapitated. Their heads were stacked in a neat pile to one side. Their bodies were thrown into the pit together. Isotopic analysis of their teeth, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2012, revealed they were not locals. They were all from Scandinavia, from different parts of the Viking world. Carbon dating placed the execution between the years 970 and 1025. This was a captured Viking raiding party. They had been defeated, rounded up, and systematically executed by the local Anglo-Saxons, stripped naked, forced to watch their companions beheaded one by one before their own turn came. This discovery doesn't erase the suffering of the enslaved women. It doesn't forgive the brutality of the Viking world, but it reminds us that the violence flowed in all directions. The men who sailed out to raid, to kill, to enslave, were also playing a game where they themselves could end up as victims in a pit, their heads piled up like stones. It was an age built on a ruthless economy of power, where human life was a commodity, and the roles of predator and prey could flip in an instant. The story of the enslaved woman is a story of immense suffering, a dark stain on the Viking legacy. It is the price of their golden age, paid by countless forgotten women whose names are lost to history. Their story ends not in glory, but in the cold silence of the earth, in an unmarked grave, or as ash scattered on a river wind. For them, there was no Valhalla, only the brutal reality of their servitude and a death that was not their own. The bones in the ground, whether in a chieftain's mound or a roadside pit, all tell the same story. Silver buys, steel takes, and the earth keeps the score.